Just one night. Please. The Korean Mafia boss begged his wife, unaware the black maid listened. The penthouse sat high above Seoul, wrapped in glass and steel, overlooking a city that never slept. Below, traffic shimmered like veins of light, pulsing with life and movement. Inside, however, the air was frozen, thick with words that had never been spoken and emotions that had nowhere left to go. Chairman Kang Jae-min stood near the entrance of the master bedroom, his tailored suit still perfectly pressed despite the late hour. To the outside world he was untouchable, a man whose name alone could shut down businesses, end alliances or erase enemies. To the woman standing a few steps away from him, he was none of that. Yoon Seo-rin faced the window, her arms folded tightly across her chest. The city lights reflected in her eyes, but they did nothing to warm them. She wore a silk robe, elegant and distant, like a queen who had already abdicated her throne. The silence stretched. Jae-min loosened his tie slowly, as if every movement required permission. "You didn't come to dinner?" he said at last, his voice low, careful. "I wasn't hungry," Seo-rin replied. He knew that tone. Polite. Controlled. The tone she used with strangers. "You haven't been hungry for weeks," he said. She didn't turn around. Once, years ago, this room had been filled with laughter, whispered plans, late-night confessions spoken under tangled sheets. Now even the walls felt like they were listening, judging. "I didn't marry you to live alone," Seo-rin said quietly. The words struck harder than a shout. Jae-min took a step closer, then stopped as if an invisible line separated them. "I know I've made mistakes." She let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Mistakes are forgetting anniversaries. What you did was choose secrecy over us." His jaw tightened. In his world, secrets meant survival. Weakness got people killed. But none of those rules mattered here, not with her. "I was protecting you," he said. "From what?" she asked, finally turning. "From the truth? Or from who you really are?" Their eyes met, and for a brief moment the years collapsed. Their first meeting, her fearless gaze, the way she had loved him knowing exactly how dangerous he was. That woman was still here, but wounded. "You shut me out," she continued. "You stopped touching me like you were afraid I'd see something in your eyes." Jaemin's hands curled into fists. He had faced gun barrels without flinching, but this terrified him. "I didn't want you to carry my darkness," he said. "And you decided that for me?" Her voice cracked for the first time. "You decided I wasn't strong enough to stand beside you?" The words hung heavy. Outside the bedroom, down the marble hallway, Amelie stood frozen. She had been hired only 2 weeks earlier. A quiet, observant woman with soft footsteps and eyes that noticed everything. Carrying fresh towels, she had stopped when she heard raised voices. She knew she should walk away. She knew this wasn't her place. But something in the pain threading through Seo-rin's voice rooted her there. Inside the room, Jae-min exhaled slowly. "I don't know how to fix this." Seo-rin's shoulders sagged just slightly. "That's the first honest thing you've said in a long time." He took another step forward, closer than he'd been in weeks. "Talk to me," he pleaded, the word tasting foreign on his tongue. "Please." Amelie's breath caught. The feared Kang Jae-min, begging. Seo-rin looked at him as though weighing something fragile. "Talking now feels too late." "No," he said quickly. "It can't be." She turned away again, pressing her palm to the glass. "I don't know who you are anymore." That admission hurt more than any accusation. Jae-min stared at her back, realizing that power had never prepared him for this kind of loss. He could command armies, manipulate markets, bend men to his will, but he could not force love to stay. In the hallway, Amelie stepped back silently, her heart pounding. She hadn't meant to hear any of it, but now she carried their truth with her. And somewhere between the city lights and the unspoken pain, the night deepened, heavy with a question no one dared to ask yet. Was this marriage already over? Or was this only the beginning of something far more dangerous? The door closed softly behind Seo-rin, but the sound echoed in Jaemin's chest like a final verdict. The master bedroom felt colder without her presence, stripped of warmth and meaning. He remained standing where she had left him, staring at the empty space beside the window, as if she might return if he stared long enough. She didn't. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. Time moved differently when regret sat this close. Jae-min finally sank onto the edge of the bed, elbows resting on his knees, his head bowed. In the underground world, hesitation meant death. Indecision was weakness. Yet here he was, paralyzed by the one woman he could never intimidate, threaten, or outmaneuver. He whispered her name into the silence. Seo-rin. No response. Down the hallway, Amelie moved quietly, her heart still racing from what she had overheard earlier. She told herself to forget it. Rich people argued all the time. Powerful marriages always cracked under pressure. It wasn't her business. But the ache in Siorin's voice hadn't sounded like ordinary anger. It sounded like grief. A soft sound drifted from the bedroom, something between a sigh and a breath pulled too deep. Jaemin stood abruptly, straightening his jacket as if preparing for battle. Only this time there were no weapons. No guards. No strategies. Just truth. He stepped into the living room where Siorin sat on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, staring at nothing. The city lights cast shadows across her face, making her look tired in a way he had never seen before. "I won't insult you by pretending I don't know why you're distant," he said carefully. She didn't look at him. "I lied," he continued. "Not about my world, but about how much it was costing me. Costing us." Her fingers tightened around the cushion. "You vanished while standing right beside me," she said softly. "Every time I reached for you, you were already somewhere else. Planning. Controlling. Deciding everything alone. I was trying to keep you safe." Safe from what? She finally looked up at him, eyes sharp. "Your enemies, or your feelings?" The question hit harder than any accusation. He took a step closer, then another, until he stood in front of her. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself onto one knee. Amelie, passing the corridor again with a tray of tea, froze in disbelief. The Korean Mafia boss, kneeling? "Just one night," Jaemin said, his voice rough, stripped of authority. "One night where you don't shut me out. Where you let me remind you that before I was a chairman, before I was feared, I was your husband." Siorin stood abruptly, backing away as if his vulnerability frightened her more than his power ever had. "You think intimacy erases betrayal?" she asked. "You think touching me will undo months of silence?" "No," he admitted. "But I'm afraid if I don't reach for you now, I'll lose you forever." His voice cracked on the last word. Amelie felt a lump form in her throat. She had grown up believing powerful men never begged. This man was unraveling in front of the woman he loved, and it was terrifying. Siorin turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. "You don't get to decide when you need me again." "I know," he said quickly. "That's why I'm asking. Begging if that's what it takes." She closed her eyes. For a long moment, there was nothing but the hum of the city and the weight of everything unsaid. "You hurt me," she whispered. "And you didn't even notice when I stopped trying." Jaemin rose slowly, his pride in pieces at her feet. "I notice now. That may not be enough." She walked past him, leaving him standing in the middle of the room, expensive furniture, priceless art, and not a single thing he could use to fix what mattered most. Amelie slipped away before she could be seen, her chest tight. That night, Jaemin stood alone by the window, watching the city that bowed to him, realizing none of it mattered if the woman who once chose him no longer did. For the first time in his life, the king wore his suit like armor that no longer fit. And somewhere in the shadows of the penthouse, a maid carried the weight of a secret that could change everything. Morning arrived quietly in the penthouse, filtered through pale curtains and unfinished conversations. The night's tension still lingered in the air, heavy and unresolved, as if the walls themselves remembered every word spoken in desperation. Amelie rose before dawn as she always did. She moved through the staff quarters with practiced silence, tying her hair back neatly, steadying her breath. She told herself, again, that what she had overheard was none of her concern. Wealthy families carried private storms. She was paid to clean, not to feel. Yet as she entered the main living area, the memory returned uninvited. "Just one night, please." The words echoed louder than the marble floors beneath her feet. She began her duties methodically, dusting surfaces, straightening cushions, restoring order to a space that felt anything but orderly. The penthouse was immaculate, yet emotionally abandoned, like a museum curated around a marriage slowly collapsing. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Chairman Kong standing by the window again. He hadn't changed out of his clothes. His tie was loosened now, jacket draped over a chair, sleeves rolled just enough to reveal a man who had not slept. He stared out at the city as if searching for something he had dropped somewhere among the lights. Amelie hesitated. Protocol dictated she announce herself. Instinct told her to retreat. "Leave it," Jaemin said quietly without turning around. She froze. "Sir?" "The cleaning," he clarified. "I don't need it this morning." "Yes, Chairman," she replied, lowering her eyes. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her again. "You're new." "Yes, sir." "Amelie." He turned this time, studying her, not in the way powerful men often did, but with a sharpness that suggested awareness rather than dominance. "You're not from here." "No, sir." "South Africa," he said, not asking. She nodded, surprised. "Yes." Silence followed. Not awkward, observant. "You walk quietly," he said at last. "Almost like you don't want to be noticed." Amelie chose her words carefully. Some people survive better that way. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps. You may continue, he said, dismissing her gently. She moved into the private study, her heart pounding harder than it should have. Of all the staff, he had noticed her. And worse, she knew something she shouldn't. The study was darker than the rest of the penthouse, lined with shelves of books and hidden compartments. Power lived here. Contracts, secrets, leverage. Emily cleaned carefully, aware she was standing inside the mind of a man who controlled lives. As she wiped the desk, she noticed a framed photo placed face down. She hesitated, then gently turned it upright. It was an old picture, Jaemin and Seorin younger, smiling freely. His arm was around her shoulders, her head tilted toward him, eyes bright with trust. Emily's chest tightened. So they had once been happy. Behind her, the door opened. She turned instantly, guilt flashing through her eyes. Jaemin stopped short when he saw the photo in her hand. I'm sorry, Emily said quickly, placing it back. I didn't mean to. It's fine, he said. His voice wasn't cold, just tired. He crossed the room, picked up the photo, and stared at it for a long moment. This was taken before everything became complicated. Emily lowered her gaze. Sometimes complications don't erase what was real. He looked at her sharply. You heard us, he said plainly. There was no anger in his tone, just certainty. Emily inhaled slowly. Lying would insult them both. Yes, sir. Why didn't you report it? Or pretend you didn't? Because, she said softly, some pain doesn't need witnesses. And some truths don't need repeating. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. A quiet, bitter sound. You know, men fear me because I never let anyone see weakness. His eyes met hers. And yet, you saw it without trying. I didn't judge, Emily said. I know, he replied. That was what unsettled him most. He placed the photo back on the desk, face up this time, and straightened his cuffs. The mask slipped back into place, but not entirely. You may go, he said. Emily bowed slightly and left the study, her pulse racing. As she walked away, she realized something dangerous. She now carried knowledge that didn't belong to her. She had seen the man beneath the myth. And once you see that, nothing stays simple again. Behind her, Jaemin stood alone in the study, staring at the photograph, realizing that sometimes the most threatening thing wasn't an enemy, but a stranger who saw you exactly as you were. The rain began in the late afternoon, light at first, then steady, tapping against the glass walls of the penthouse like an impatient knock. It mirrored Seorin's mood, controlled on the surface, turbulent underneath. She stood in the dressing room, folding clothes with precise movements. Not packing, just organizing. She told herself it was about control, about reclaiming something in a life where too much had slipped beyond her grasp. In truth, she was stalling. Because once she stopped moving, she would have to feel. The door behind her opened quietly. I thought you might be here, Jaemin said. She didn't turn. You usually do. He took that as permission to speak. You didn't sleep. Neither did you. Another truth laid bare. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her reflection in the mirror. She looked the same, elegant, composed, but he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. He had put it there. I won't pretend I deserve forgiveness, he said. But I need to know if there's still a path forward. Seorin finally turned, folding the last blouse with deliberate care before placing it aside. There is, she said. Hope sparked instantly in his chest. But it isn't the one you want. He straightened. Tell me. She walked past him into the bedroom, motioning for him to follow. The space felt different in daylight. Less dramatic, more honest. Too honest. One night, she said, echoing his words from the night before. But not as your wife. His breath caught. Then as what? As two people who once loved each other, she replied. And now need to decide whether that love survived your secrets. The rain intensified outside, streaking the windows. No guards, she continued. No phones. No business calls. No power games. If you step into this night, you do so without your title. He nodded immediately. Anything. She held up a hand. I'm not finished. Her voice steadied, but her eyes shimmered. No promises. No apologies meant to soften me. I don't want to be touched like something you're afraid to lose. I want truth even if it ends us. The words sliced deep. You're asking me to lay myself bare, he said quietly. I did that for years, she replied. Alone. Silence settled between them, thick, fragile. In the hallway, Emily stood with a folded blanket in her arms, rooted in place once again. She hadn't meant to overhear, but the doors were open, the emotions too loud to ignore. One night, Emily thought. Not as husband and wife. She felt a strange ache. An intimacy defined by rules hurt more than one defined by distance. Inside the bedroom, Jaemin nodded slowly. I accept. Seorin studied him as if searching for cracks. If you cross a single boundary, I walk away. No explanations. I understand. Do you? She wondered. She moved toward the window, the city reflected behind her like a second life. Tonight doesn't mean reconciliation. I know. It doesn't mean intimacy. I know, he repeated, though his voice tightened. It means clarity. He exhaled. Then that's what I'll give you. For the first time since the conversation began, Seorin's shoulders relaxed. Just a fraction. Tonight, she said, we speak like strangers who still remember how to be honest. Amelie stepped back quietly, heart pounding. She felt like she was witnessing something sacred and dangerous. This wasn't a romantic gesture. It was an emotional trial. As evening approached, the penthouse shifted. Staff were dismissed early. Lights were dimmed. The usual hum of power retreated, leaving behind something raw and uncertain. Jaemin stood alone in the study later, removing his watch, his cufflinks, his ring, symbols of the man he had hidden behind for too long. Each item felt heavier than the last. Across the hall, Seorin sat at her vanity, staring at her reflection. One night, she thought, to see if the man I married still exists. Neither of them noticed Amelie watching from afar, understanding something they did not yet realize. This night would not end the way either of them expected. Because when truth is invited in, it rarely leaves quietly. Night fell slowly, deliberately, as if the city itself hesitated to intrude on what was about to unfold inside the penthouse. The rain had stopped, leaving the windows streaked and blurred, turning Seoul into a painting of soft lights and shadows. The penthouse was unusually quiet. No guards near the doors. No aides whispering into headsets. No phones vibrating with demands. It felt stripped down, bare, almost vulnerable. Seorin entered the living room first. She had changed into a simple, elegant dress, nothing meant to impress. Her hair was loose, framing her face the way it used to on evenings when life felt easier. She sat on one end of the couch, folding her hands neatly in her lap, as though preparing for an interview rather than a night that could redefine her marriage. Jaemin followed moments later. He wasn't wearing his suit. Instead, he wore a plain dark shirt, sleeves rolled up, his watch gone, his presence noticeably quieter. Without the armor of power, he looked younger and more uncertain. They did not greet each other. The space between them felt deliberate. I made tea, Seorin said finally, gesturing toward the table. You used to say it helped you think. He nodded, surprised she remembered. It still does. He poured for both of them, careful not to brush her fingers when he handed her the cup. The restraint spoke louder than desire ever could. They sat in silence, sipping slowly. This is harder than I thought, he admitted. Talking always is, she replied. When you stop hiding. He leaned back slightly, eyes on the ceiling. Do you remember the first night we stayed up until morning? She allowed herself a small smile. You were convinced someone would follow you. And you laughed, he said. You told me fear only wins if you invite it inside. Her smile faded. Some fears earn their way in. He turned toward her. That night, I thought marrying you would make me stronger. And instead, she asked. And instead, I became afraid of losing you, he said honestly. So I started controlling everything else. Seorin inhaled sharply, emotion flickering across her face. You don't protect love by locking it away. I know that now. Why didn't you say it then? Because men like me are taught silence is survival. She looked at him then, not as a wife, not as a wounded partner, but as someone finally seeing the man behind the choices. And what did that silence cost you? He met her gaze. Almost everything. The words settled between them like a confession. Outside, the city lights flickered, unaware that something far more fragile than a business empire was being negotiated inside. I felt invisible, Seorin said softly. I would sit across from you at dinner and feel like a ghost. You touched me like you were afraid I'd break, or worse, see through you. Jaemin swallowed. I didn't want you to see how tired I was. How scared. Tired men can be loved, she said. Scared men can be held. But absent men leave wounds. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking, not dramatically but sincerely. Not to fix things. Just because it's true. That mattered more than any grand apology. They talked for hours. About the distance. About the nights she cried quietly while he worked late. About the deals he made that haunted him. About the versions of themselves they no longer recognized. At one point, laughter escaped them, surprised, soft, bittersweet. You still hate mint chocolate, he said. And you still pretend you don't like sweet things, she replied. For a moment it felt dangerously familiar. But when his hand rested on the couch between them, Close, not touching, Siorin stood. That's enough, she said gently. He withdrew immediately. She nodded, appreciating the respect. Tonight wasn't about crossing lines. No, he agreed. It was about seeing them clearly. Behind a partially closed door down the hall, Amelie moved quietly, placing a blanket on a chair, then stopping when she heard their voices soften. She didn't linger. She didn't need to. Even from a distance, she understood. Nothing physical had happened, but everything had shifted. Later, Siorin stood alone on the balcony, the cool air brushing against her skin. Jaemin joined her, keeping a careful distance. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, she said. I won't ask you to, he replied. I'll wait without pressure. She glanced at him, searching for something familiar. I believe you, she said quietly. And that scares me. He smiled sadly. It should. The clock ticked past midnight. Their one night didn't end in passion or reconciliation. It ended in truth, raw, unsettling, and impossible to ignore. And sometimes truth changes everything, even when love is still undecided. Morning crept into the penthouse like an uninvited guest, soft and pale, illuminating what the night had exposed but not resolved. The city outside looked the same, busy, loud, indifferent, but inside, everything felt altered as if the air itself had learned new secrets. Jaemin stood alone in the kitchen, staring into a cup of untouched coffee. The truth-filled night had left him raw, stripped. He felt lighter and heavier all at once. Lighter for having spoken, heavier for realizing how much damage silence had done. Siorin had left early. No goodbye kiss. No promise. Just a quiet, take care, spoken with a gentleness that hurt more than anger ever had. He replayed it over and over. The sound of soft footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Amelie entered the kitchen, her movements precise, respectful. She paused when she noticed him, surprised to see the chairman there at this hour, without his usual entourage or rigid posture. Good morning, sir, she said calmly. Good morning, he replied, then added, almost absently, you don't have to call me that when we're alone. She hesitated. It's habit. So is hiding, he said, meeting her eyes. The word startled them both. Amelie lowered her gaze. I didn't mean to overhear last night. I know, he said quietly. You never do. She looked up then, confusion flickering across her face. You move through this house like a shadow, he continued. Careful not to disturb anyone. Careful not to be seen. That's part of my job, she replied gently. No, he said. That's part of your armor. The observation hung between them. Amelie set the tray down slowly. Some of us don't have the luxury of being loud. Jaemin nodded, understanding more than she realized. Neither do some men in power. Silence followed, not uncomfortable but charged. Two people recognizing something familiar in each other without naming it. He watched as she prepared the table, noticing details he never had before. The steadiness of her hands, the way she centered herself before every task, the quiet dignity she carried despite her position. You heard more than you should have, he said finally. Yes. And yet, he added, you stayed. She met his gaze. You didn't ask me to leave. He exhaled slowly. No, I didn't. There it was, the truth neither of them had acknowledged. Amelie straightened. If my presence makes things complicated, I can request reassignment. The idea unsettled him more than it should have. That won't be necessary, he said quickly, then softened his tone. You haven't done anything wrong. Neither have you, she replied. Not by speaking. That simple statement landed hard. No one ever told him that truth wasn't weakness. Later that day, the penthouse resumed its rhythm. Calls returned. Meetings stacked. The chairman mask slipped back into place, but it didn't fit as seamlessly anymore. Still, Jaemin found his attention drifting. When Amelie passed the hallway, he noticed. When she served tea during a meeting, he noticed the way she avoided eye contact. Not from fear, but from discipline. When she laughed quietly with another staff member, the sound startled him. That evening, he found her in the private study again, dusting shelves. You can leave that, he said. She nodded but didn't move immediately. You don't like this room, she said suddenly. He blinked. What makes you say that? You never stay long, she replied. It's full of power but empty of rest. He studied her, impressed despite himself. You're very perceptive. You have to be, she said. When you're invisible. He stepped closer, not threatening, not intimate, just present. You aren't invisible here. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Amelie stiffened slightly. With respect, sir, that's not something I should hear. You're right, he said immediately. I apologize. But the damage, or the connection, was already made. That night, alone in his bedroom, Jaemin realized something unsettling. He wasn't drawn to Amelie because of attraction. He was drawn to her because she had seen him broken, and didn't flinch. And that kind of understanding was dangerous. Across the hall, Amelie lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying his words. You aren't invisible here. In a house built on power, secrecy, and restraint, those words felt like a line crossed, quietly, unintentionally, and impossibly. Both of them understood the truth they refused to say aloud. Some connections don't need touch to become dangerous. And once noticed, they cannot be unseen. The decision did not come suddenly. It arrived the way most irreversible things do, quietly, patiently, after every other option had exhausted itself. Siorin stood in the bedroom she had shared with Jaemin for years, a single suitcase open on the bed. She folded each item with care, as if respect might soften the meaning of what she was doing. She was not running. She was choosing space. Jaemin watched from the doorway. He had known this moment was coming. Still, knowing did nothing to dull the ache spreading through his chest. You don't have to leave like this, he said softly. She didn't look up. If I stay, I'll keep hoping for answers that aren't ready yet. He stepped inside. I meant what I said. I'll wait. She paused, her hands stilling. Waiting isn't the same as changing. I am changing, he said quickly. Every day. She finally faced him then. Change doesn't prove itself in days. It proves itself in distance. The truth of that silenced him. I need to remember who I was before I became someone waiting for you, she continued. If there's still something between us, it will survive this. And if there isn't? He asked. She swallowed. Then at least we'll both know. They stood there, two people bound by history, letting go without anger. Sometimes love didn't end in explosions. Sometimes it ended in suitcases. In the hallway, Amelie approached quietly, unaware she was walking toward a farewell. She stopped short when she saw Siorin emerge, composed but pale. Thank you, Siorin said suddenly, turning to her. Amelie startled. For being kind, Siorin replied, her gaze steady and knowing. Not accusing. Not threatened. Just perceptive. This house needed that. Amelie bowed her head slightly. I wish you peace, ma'am. Siorin smiled faintly. I think you already gave me some. Then she was gone. The door closed with a final soft click. The penthouse exhaled. Jaemin remained where he was long after Siorin left, staring at the space she had occupied. Power returned quickly, calls resumed, men waited, decisions demanded attention, but something essential had been removed. That evening, Amelie brought him tea. Their fingers brushed by accident. The contact was brief, electric, and immediately broken. I'll be requesting a transfer, Amelie said quietly, eyes lowered. The words struck harder than expected. Why? He asked before he could stop himself. She hesitated, choosing honesty over comfort. Because this house is full of endings. And I don't want to become part of one I don't understand. He respected her for that. When? He asked. Soon, she replied. Before lines blur. He nodded slowly, though every instinct resisted. That's wise. Silence followed, thick, unresolved. You helped more than you know, he said finally. She met his eyes briefly. So did you. That night, the penthouse felt cavernous. Jaemin stood by the window again, but this time the city lights didn't comfort him. He realized something painful and clarifying all at once. Love demanded vulnerability. Power demanded control. And he had tried to hold both with the same hands. Across the city, Siorin stared out of a hotel window, wondering if distance would bring clarity or finality. And somewhere between them, a maid packed her belongings quietly, leaving behind nothing tangible, but taking with her a truth that would never leave him. Some people enter your life not to stay, but to wake you up before it's too late. Time did what it always did. It moved forward, without mercy, without pause, carrying everyone with it whether they were ready or not. The penthouse changed after they left. Not dramatically. Not in ways outsiders would notice. The furniture remained. The art still hung perfectly aligned. The guards still stood watch. But the silence shifted. It was no longer tense or heavy, it was reflective, like a space that had learned how to breathe again. Chairman Kang Jaemin became quieter. Those who worked for him noticed it first. He listened more. Spoke less. When he did speak, there was thought behind every word, not just command. He stopped ruling from distance and began ruling from presence. Deals were renegotiated. Enemies were handled with restraint instead of destruction. Power, he realized, didn't need to roar. At night, when the city slept, he sometimes sat alone in the living room, lights dimmed, tea untouched, replaying that single night of truth over and over. Not the words themselves, but the feeling of being seen without armor. Just one night he had begged. He hadn't known then that one night would change the way he lived every day after. Amelie left quietly. No farewell scene. No dramatic goodbye. Just a short message left with the head of staff and a neatly folded uniform placed where it had always hung. She moved to another city, another house, another life where the walls didn't echo with other people's heartbreak. Still, some nights she remembered the penthouse. Not the luxury, but the vulnerability. She carried that lesson with her wherever she went. That power does not erase pain. And silence does not mean strength. She never spoke of Chairman Kong again, but she never forgot him either. Rin returned months later. Not suddenly. Not impulsively. She came back the way healing comes, slowly, carefully, with boundaries intact. Jaemin was not waiting at the door when she arrived. That mattered. He was in the study working when he was told she was there. When he looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, calm and composed, something inside him steadied. "You came," he said simply. "I said I might," she replied. They didn't touch. They sat across from each other the way they had that night, two people no longer pretending they were unbroken. "I needed to know who I was without you," Rin said. "And whether I wanted to choose you again, not out of habit but out of clarity." "And?" he asked, not daring to hope. She studied him. Not the chairman. Not the legend. The man. "You didn't chase me," she said. "You didn't pressure me. You didn't turn my absence into another form of control." "I was afraid if I did," he admitted, "you'd never come back." "That fear," she said softly, "is the difference." They talked for hours. Not about the past, but about the future. About what honesty would cost them. About what boundaries would protect them. About what love would require now, not then. When she finally stood to leave that night, he didn't stop her. "I'll come back," she said at the